Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me on our last episode of the most recent disclosure releases. Now, we've spent 5 episodes trying to go into as much depth as we can on everything that's been released. But for the start of this episode, we're going to take a step back from the footage, a step back from the orbs, the documents, the videos, the warnings, all of it. And we're going to look at the whole thing from above, the full 80 years. Because when you do, a shape appears, and it's not the shape anyone selling you a thumbnail wants you to see. Because it's a circle, it's the same loop turning over and over since 1947. Dramatic sighting, public uproar, government study, official conclusion, nothing to see here. No threat. Silence. Then years later, new evidence, new uproar, new study. Same conclusion. Round and round. And the question that decides whether this entire moment matters is brutally simple. Is pursuit just the next turn of the same old circle? Or is it, finally, the first time the circle becomes a way out? Well, today we're going to trace the whole loop, so you can judge for yourself where you actually land. It starts in the summer of 1947. A pilot reports objects moving over Washington state, and a reporter coins the phrase flying saucers. Weeks later, something crashes near Roswell, New Mexico. The military first says it recovered a flying disc, then walks it back to a weather balloon within a few days. That 48-hour reversal, right at the very beginning, sets the template for everything that follows. An official admission, then an official retraction, and the public that never quite trusts either. The government responds the way the governments do. It opens a study, Project Sign in 1948, Project Grudge in 1949. And the name here tells you the attitude. But then there's the big one, Project Blue Book, running from 1952 all the way to 1969. More than 12,000 cases logged over 17 years. And here's the conclusion Blue Book reached when it shut down. No UAP had ever threatened national security. None represented technology beyond our own. And there was no evidence of anything extraterrestrial. Case closed. That sound familiar? It's almost word for word what the AARO says today. And here's the detail that should bother you about how Blue Book ended. It was wound down largely on the strength of a major university study, the Condon report, which concluded that further investigation wasn't likely to yield much and recommended shutting down the effort. But people who actually read the full report, rather than its summary, found something strange, buried in its own pages were cases the study itself could not explain. The conclusion announced nothing to see here. The data underneath it said, well, some of these things we can't genuinely account for. The headline and the evidence didn't match. The headline won because the headline is what closes a program and calms the public. The gap between what an official study concludes and what its own data actually contains is a pattern that you will see again and again in this story. Always read past the summary. The summary is written for the public, the data is written for the record, and they are not always the same document. But there's a piece of that most people don't know, and it matters for everything we've covered. In 1953, a panel convened by the CIA looked at the UFO problem. And its recommendation wasn't just investigate it, it was in part to reduce public interest in the subject, to strip away the mystery, to debunk. Just read that back. As far back as the 1950s, an arm of the US government had a documented policy not just to understanding the reports, but managing how the public cared about them. So when this channel keeps asking, is this disclosure or perception management? That's not paranoia, that is history. The perception management playbook on this subject is 70 years old, and we've got all the paperwork. And that policy had a cost we are still paying. When the official posture is there's nothing to see here, would rather not dwell on it, you teach an entire profession to stay silent. For decades, military and commercial pilots, the best observers we have, the people trained to identify aircraft for a living, learned that reporting on an unidentified object was a fast route to being grounded, mocked, or quietly sidelined. So naturally, they just stopped reporting it. The stigma did exactly what the playbook intended. It didn't make the phenomenon go away, it made the data go away. And think about what that does to the record. Over 80 years of UAP files are not 80 years of everything that happened in the sky. They are 80 years of a small fraction of sighting that someone was brave enough or rattled enough to report despite the cost. The ridicule was never neutral, it was a filter, and it filtered out precisely the careful, career-conscious witnesses whose reports we'd most want to hear and maybe even trust. One of the few genuinely good things this moment is that the stigma is finally cracking. People are reporting again, and the data might at least start getting better. Then the circle goes quiet for a generation and turns again in our lifetime. One of the events that completely opened my eyes to this whole phenomenon was in 2004. Navy pilots off the coast of California encounter an object they described as a white Tic Tac. No wings, no exhaust, moving in ways that genuinely rattled experienced aviators. And for over a decade, almost nobody outside the military heard about it. Then, 2017, a major newspaper breaks the story of a secret Pentagon UAP program and releases 3 now famous Navy videos. The circle is roaring again. By 2020, the Pentagon officially declassified that footage. 2021, the intelligence community published an assessment of 114 incidents and concludes that the vast majority couldn't be explained, but mostly they stressed for the lack of good data. 2022, a new office, the AARO, is created and Congress holds its first open UAP hearing in roughly half a century. And then in 2023, a former intelligence officer testified under oath about hidden crash retrieval programs. 2024, the AARO publishes a sweeping historical review that found no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial technology or reverse engineering, attributing much of the law to misidentified secret programs and decades of bureaucratic myth feeding on itself. And that leaves us to February 2026, a presidential directive, Pursue, the portal, the 8th of May, the 22nd of May. And this leads us to where we are today. So lay out that timeline end to end and the loop is undeniable. 1949, official studies conclude no threat, nothing exotic. 1969, official studies concludes no threat, nothing exotic. And in 2024, official studies conclude yet again no verifiable exotic technology. 3/4 of a century, the same conclusion 3 times in almost the same words. That's the circle. And anyone telling you this really shatters it is not looking at the timeline. But, and this is why I always like to push back on our own thesis here, because that is the job, a circle and a spiral look identical from directly above. If we look again, something is moving. In 1969, the official position was effectively, there is nothing here, stop asking. Today, the official position is, there is a real, reoccurring phenomenon. We cannot identify a meaningful slice of it. Here is a public portal with the files. Go and make up your own mind. Now, those are not the same statements. The conclusion about extraterrestrial hasn't changed, but the admission of ignorance has grown and the secrecy has thinned. Each turn of this loop, the government concedes a little more ground. We've gone from nothing to see here to we have footage we can't explain to here, go and look at it for yourself. So maybe it isn't a circle, maybe it is a spiral. It's the same loop, but climbing each time. The denial of 1969 is dead. The Pentagon now publishes the footage it once would have buried. And that's a genuine motion. The danger is mistaking motion for arrival. A spiral still goes round and round. Climbing is not the same as reaching the top. And a government that has stopped lying about whether the phenomenon exists is not a government that has told you the truth about what it is. Those are different milestones, and we've only just passed the first. So why does the circle keep closing on we don't know? After 80 years and 1,200 plus cases, why is there no answer? Well, there's 2 reasons, and they have the same 2 that we hit all series. First, the data has almost always been bad. eyewitnesses, blurry single sensor clips, reports filed days later from memory. The phenomenon, whatever it is, tends to show up exactly where the instruments are weakest. Just this year, the head of the AARO told Congress that the famous Go Fast video, one of those 2017 clips that looked impossible to explain, has essentially been resolved. Run the geometry, and the object wasn't moving anywhere near as fast as it looked. Another dramatic case quietly downgraded to the ordinary. And that does keep happening. And it should make you cautious about every clip in the current release that looks extraordinary today. What will it show tomorrow? The second, and you have to hold this with the first, not everything downgrades. Some cases survive the geometry. Some witnesses get corrected upwards, not downwards, like the orb measured at 1 kilometre. The AARO's own studies keep landing on the same stubborn residue. A small percentage of the data, at least as it stands, genuinely cannot close. So the circle closes on "we don't know" for two completely different reasons jammed together. Most cases because they are underdocumented, mundane things, and a few because they are genuinely, measurably odd. And as long as these two paths keep getting reported as one, the loop will continue turning forever. And before we ask what breaks the cycle, understand that America is not the only country turning to it. This gets told as a US story, but the phenomenon and the official interest in it is global. And that's one of the stronger arguments that something real is being reported. France has run its own official body for a decade and publicly archives and investigates UAP cases. The only government in the world that openly publishes its files. Britain's Ministry of Defence ran its own studies and kept a UFO desk for years. Chile and Brazil, as well as others, had formal military or government programs. All told, somewhere around a dozen national governments have at one point or another taken this seriously enough to pay people to look at it. And right now, reporting suggests Japan's government is analysing the American release and weighing what to do with its own research. And here's the weight of that. If the entire phenomenon was an American social contagion, a homegrown myth feeding on itself, you would not expect the militaries of France, Chile, Japan and Britain to go and independently log the same kind of objects decades apart with no shared script. The skeptics have a comeback, and it's fair. Media and culture cross borders too. So a contagion can go global, and that is true. But cross-culture, cross-decade, cross-military, the consistency is a far harder thing to just wave away than one nation's panic. The orb reported over New Mexico in 1949 and the orb reported over the Persian Gulf today are being described in languages that never compared notes. And one thing that I think is really important to hear before we close out, because it gets buried under the alien or not shouting match. You do not need this to be extraterrestrial for it to matter enormously. If we strip away the word alien completely, what are you left with? Unidentified objects, repeatedly, over military installations and nuclear sites that the most advanced air defense systems on Earth cannot reliably detect, identify, or explain. That is a serious problem, no matter what the objects turn out to be. If they are a foreign adversary's technology, drones or surveillance platforms that we cannot yet counter, that's a national security emergency. If it's a sensor or a perception artifact of our own systems that keep generating, that's a dangerous flaw in the instruments we trust to tell friend from foe. And if there's something stranger, then it's the biggest story in human history, and every one of those is worth the most serious investigation a state can mount. The "is it aliens" framing is almost a trap. It lets people dismiss the entire subject the second the answer is, well, it's probably not aliens. But probably not aliens still leaves you with the unidentified objects over nuclear weapons. And that sentence can never be allowed to feel comfortable. Which raises the only question that actually matters going forward. What would break the cycle? What would turn a spiral into a rival? So here's an answer, and it's deliberately demanding because 80 years of letdown has earned us the right to set a very high bar. We've got three things, and any one of them would potentially end all of this. A recovered craft or material from one, placed in independent scientific hands, not described in testimony, but examined, measured, published, or even reproduced. Physical evidence outside the government's control. That, and almost only that, settles the recovered technology claim that everyone else orbits. Second is a calibrated, multi-sensor capture of an object indisputably performing one of the 5 observables, such as instant acceleration or transmedium travel, with the full instrument record handed to scientists who don't work for the agency that filmed it. Not a clip, but a measurement. And lastly, a sworn testimony that is finally corroborated by someone other than more sworn testimonies. The whistleblowers may be right, but the cycle only breaks when their words are backed up by a document, a material, or a thing, not by another whistleblower saying the same thing. And notice what all 3 have in common. Every one of them requires evidence that leaves government custody and survives independent examination. And notice what Pursuit is. For all of its billion clicks, it has not yet delivered a single one of them. The portal is a government website created by the government, released on the government schedule. It is by definition evidence that never left their hands, which is exactly why, historic as it is, it cannot on its own break the cycle. It can only be the latest, most impressive turn of it. So let me land this whole run honestly. What genuinely changed in May 2026? And this is exciting. The denial died. For over 80 years, the reflex was, there's nothing to see here. But the reflex now, officially and publicly, is permanently dead, replaced by a live portal, more than 220 files, and an admission that a real phenomenon exists that the government cannot fully explain. That is most certainly not nothing. People fought their careers and reputation for decades to kill that old lie, and this year it has finally died. And I want to honour that. And the story that has gone global, Japan analysing the files, around a dozen nations having run their own programs. The question now sitting on the desk in capitals is far beyond what Washington says. The walls are thinner than they ever have been in human history. But what did not change? And that's the answer. After everything, the videos, the orbs, the audio and the documents, the testimony and the credentialed warnings, the central question is exactly where it was in 1947. What are these things? We still don't know. The government still doesn't say. And every piece of evidence we've been handed this month is either explainable, unverifiable, or under their control. Which is why the line we opened with 6 episodes ago is the line we have to close with. Data itself is not disclosure, 1 billion clicks is not the answer, and 225 files you can't fully authenticate is not the truth. A government that stopped lying is not a government that tells you everything. The circle is turning, it may even be climbing, but it has not let us out, not yet. And the honest thing, no matter how badly we want it, is we cannot pretend it already has. So we're going to watch for the 3rd release. The exact same way we watched out for these 2. We're going to separate the primary from the testimony from the interpretation. Trust the people who hand you away to check, not the ones who ask you to kneel. Take the explainable cases off the table ruthlessly, and then take the residue that's left utterly seriously. And watch for the specific things when the next drop lands, so you're not swept along. Watch whether any of the files finally arrives with a full chain of custody instead of the "it was likely taken here" hedge. Watch whether anything gets handed to independent scientists outside the agency or whether it stays on a government website. Watch whether the descriptions admit what they don't know or quietly steer your reading. And watch the gap we just talked about between the press release summary and the actual data underneath. If the 3rd release breaks any of those patterns, that is real progress and we'll be the first ones to say so. But if it's just more of these curated clips that pile up and that turn out to be another beautiful turn of the same old wheel, then we're going to say that too. But either way, we'll get it straight to the point here. No hype, no lazy dismissals either way. just the evidence weighed up and sorted as honestly as we can make it, the way it should have been from the very start, because somewhere in all this noise, there may be a real signal, and the only way we'll ever find it is being honest and swallow the hype and be curious. That's the whole job, and that's why this channel is here. So you guys tell me, after these last episodes and the most two recent disclosure drops, where do you stand on the circle? Are we in the same spot as 1947, or are we progressing down a line of disclosure? Do you trust the government in what it says now? What are they leaving out? As ever, if we've misrepresented anything or misinformed, please let us know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching this 6-episode mini-series. We will go back to our normal episodes of historical untold evidence from tomorrow. And as ever, please follow the evidence.